Now, if there's one thing that we all share in common, it is that we're all gonna die someday. Cheery start to the video, love this so far. Quite a bummer, actually, but you know, if it is any consolation, although we might not be able to escape the inevitable, at least our fictional characters like Gandalf or Palpatine do have the chance to come back from the dead as if nothing bloody happened. So let's talk about it today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game characters who died but came back to life in the sequel anyway. Number 10, Scarecrow, Batman Arkham series. Now there are two versions of Scarecrow that people remember when they think about the Batman Arkham series. One is the mastermind villain who orchestrates Batman's downfall in Arkham Knight, and the other is a pathetic loser who's eaten by Killer Croc a few minutes after his grand reveal. Yes, despite the fact that Scarecrow plays one of the most crucial roles in the final installment of the Batman Arkham series, the truth is that for the majority of this series' lifespan, he was presumed to be dead after the events of the first game. In Arkham Asylum, Scarecrow is suddenly eaten by Killer Croc shortly after he fails to terrorize Batman, and ever since that moment, the series fans have believed him to be permanently dead. In reality, the game's writers were secretly planning on his return, making him miraculously survive his one-sided encounter with a giant crocodile man, and then secretly plan his revenge on the Dark Knight for almost allowing him to be turned into Gator Chow. You can actually see hints of Scarecrow's survival in the game's preceding Arkham Knight, like the secret Easter egg message from him in Arkham City, proving that his return was more than a last-minute decision on the developer's part. Number 9, Leliana, Dragon Age Inquisition. Leliana is one of your companions from Dragon Age Origins, who makes a return in Inquisition as the spy master for your holy crusade against the demons, which can be quite surprising for those who got her killed in the original game. Yes, despite playing an important role in the third installment of the series, Leliana can actually be killed in Dragon Age Origins. If you bring her along during the mystical quest for ashes and desecrate the sacred relic right in front of her, she'll immediately turn against you and you'll have to put her down. Her death in this outcome is permanent, as it removes her from your party, and the game even states that she has met her end by your hand. However, if you reach Inquisition with your save file where Leliana died, it turns out that her end really wasn't quite so permanent because she's still very much alive and thriving. The game never really explains how she survived her fight with you, even though she does acknowledge that it took place if you import the right save file. This is either the laziest case of a retcon, or Inquisition's spy master really is the chosen of Andrast. Number 8, Destroy Man, No More Heroes. No More Heroes is a game about secret assassination tournaments, so naturally the death rate of the characters is pretty bloody high. Still, the series has included a few unexpected returns from beyond the grave, and in the case of Destroy Man, it actually happens twice. Destroy Man's original appearance is in No More Heroes 1. He fights Travis as a fake superhero who uses technology and special effects to imitate having superpowers, and by the end of the fight, Travis splits him in two. This decision comes back to bite Travis in the sequel, where it turns out Destroy Man's body parts were salvaged and turned into two identical cyborgs, which Travis's protege Shinobu has to fight in his name. After the cyborg twins, you'd think that this is the last you'd hear about Destroy Man, but surprisingly he makes yet another return in No More Heroes 3 as a cyborg commanding an entire army of his clones. At the rate at which the series likes to duplicate him, you can only imagine what would happen if Destroy Man were to return in the next release. Would each cyborg replica from his army get a twin as well? Oh my god, my brain's broken just thinking about it. Number 7, Sergeant Johnson, Halo. These days, Sergeant Johnson is an integral part of the Halo series, but originally it seemed like the developers had a far less important role for him. In Halo Combat Evolved, the Sergeant is just a random NPC, and just like any other Marine, he can be gunned down by enemies along the campaign. If not this, there's actually a gag ending if the player beat the game on Legendary, which sees Johnson embracing a Covenant elite before they're both blown to hell. However, it seems after the series became more popular and its plot could use some revision, that the developers thought that Johnson could be a far more relevant character, and they simply just brought him back to life for Halo 2 and 3. His death was technically retconned, although the game does acknowledge his fate in Combat Evolved, as in the intro of Halo 2, one of the Marines asked Johnson how he managed to make it out of the ring alive. The story implies that in reality, Johnson was only badly wounded during the assault, and that he and a few other soldiers managed to hijack a Covenant ship to escape to safety. Whether or not this is a satisfactory rewrite, you still have to admit that bringing Sergeant Johnson back to life was the right move. It really is hard to imagine the series without him. Number 6, Charlie Nash, Street Fighter. Charlie Nash has been part of the Street Fighter series since the second game, but originally he was more of a lore element of another fighter, Guile. In Street Fighter 2, he's Guile's old friend from the army who's killed by M. Bison, becoming his friend's main motivation for going after the villain. This piece of information was later turned into an actual character in Street Fighter Alpha, where Nash makes his appearance as a playable fighter. However, because Alpha is meant to be a prequel to Street Fighter 2, all of Nash's epilogues end with his death. For this reason, Nash was canonically dead for more than 4 iterations of the Street Fighter series, until Capcom finally decided to give him an unexpected comeback in Street Fighter V. In the game, Nash is mysteriously resurrected presented as a sewn-up zombie, with the sole purpose of defeating M. Bison and avenging his own death. This version of Charlie is completely different from his original self, but honestly, this didn't stop fans from rejoicing at the news of his return when it was announced anyway. He might have been an undead abomination, but at least he's back in the series, right? Number 5. Vince Desi, Postal. Vince Desi is the CEO of Running with Scissors Inc. and a major reoccurring character in the studio's most recognizable series, Postal. This self-insert cameo is basically used as a joke, where Vince is a villain representing everything that's wrong with the video game industry, and because of this, he usually meets a pretty gruesome death. In Postal 2, he's killed by zombies, regardless or not of whether he's being killed by angry protesters first. However, in the game's expansion pack, Paradise Lost, he miraculously recovers from being turned into a zombie, but only to become an optional boss fight for you to once again kill in the most brutal fashion possible. His deaths in Postal 2 don't stop him from returning in Postal 3 either, so that he can yell at more employees and act like an ever more bitter prick. The games don't really dwell on why Vince is able to survive all of his on-screen deaths for obvious reasons. 1, he's just a gag and more like an Easter egg than a relevant story character, and 2, he's Vince bloody Desi. The man owns the company that made Postal. He can do whatever he wants. Number 4, Mileena, Mortal Kombat. Now, Mileena from Mortal Kombat is an interesting case of a character being brought back to life, as the decision was largely motivated by the real-life reactions to her death. More specifically, the fans' outrage at losing one of the series' legacy characters. In Mortal Kombat X, Mileena is killed by Sonya, who blows a hole right through her chest. The wound is pretty tame when compared to the fatalities that you can normally perform in the game, but because it happens in a cutscene, she's dead. Canonically dead. And the next title deliberately didn't include her as a playable character. But not for long, because although Mileena's death was the writer's intention, the series' fans became very vocal about the giant Mileena-shaped hole in Mortal Kombat 11, and due to the heavy demand for her character, the cannibalistic fighter with a smile that only a mother could love was brought back from the underworld as a DLC character. Now, the fun thing about the grand return here is that one of her voice lines, when her opponent asks how it's possible that she's still alive, sees her responding with, "A million voices cried out for her return," as an obvious nod to the backlash. She knows everyone loves her. Number 3, Kane, Command and Conquer. Kane is the bold and highly melodramatic villain of the Command and Conquer series, who acts as the head of the mysterious religious movement known as the Brotherhood of Nod. He appears in pretty much every single Command and Conquer title, commanding the forces of his very own cult, even though he dies in just about as many of them. Yes, Kane has had the most deaths under his belt out of all of the characters in the series, and that's because he has about 3 of them, even more if you actually count the novels. Each of his ends is more gruesome than the next, from him dying in an explosion to getting vaporized with an ion cannon. Now, the game typically makes it a point to explain how Kane made it out alive from each of his very much lethal conundrums, and sometimes the attempts on his life leave him with permanent scars on his body. Of course, you could argue that getting vaporized with a huge space laser would give him more than a few burns, but then again, this is a series with cryogenic prisons and communists escaping capitalism in spaceships that we're talking about. You really shouldn't expect it to be too realistic. Number 2, Heihachi Mishima, Tekken. Heihachi Mishima is a man who's died so many times that at this point, it's honestly surprising when he doesn't come back in the sequel. Being one of the main villains of the Tekken series, Heihachi has a pretty prominent role that more often than not includes a final showdown with the game's other characters, and these encounters tend not to end very well for the old reverse mohawk man over here. Throughout his long career in Tekken, Heihachi has died in a plethora of over-the-top ways, including getting thrown into an active volcano and a self-detonating android blowing up in his face. Some of these deaths happen so quickly that he can't even make it past the game's intro cinematic, but somehow, despite how often he meets his end, he always finds a way to come back. His return is usually explained, but since the rationale of monks sneakily catching Heihachi before he could fall into lava doesn't really sound too convincing, in Tekken 8, the writers just decided to give up on any explanation and just say, yeah, he's back. Kinda lazy, but can you really blame them for running out of ideas after killing him off so many times? And number 1, Albert Wesker, Resident Evil. Albert Wesker is the most iconic Resident Evil villain, who has been such an important part of the franchise that most people forget that he technically died in Resident Evil 1. His debut in the original title is a pretty self-containing story, starting with him betraying the team and ultimately becoming a victim of his own schemes. The game ends with Wesker dying to the very same mutant he helped create, Tyrant, who impales him with his giant claws before setting his murderous gaze on Chris. To make Wesker's death feel even more final, the entire mansion explodes in a fiery blaze shortly after he's betrayed by Tyrant. Although his wounds are definitely lethal and no one would want to bet on his survival inside an exploding lab, the sunglasses-donning villain secretly makes it out alive thanks to Ex Machina superviruses. In Resident Evil 5, long after Wesker's grand return, you can find files that finally explain that right before his untimely demise, Wesker was injected with a special strain of the T-virus that not only regenerated his missing chest, but also gave him superhuman speed, allowing him to escape the mansion right before it burned down. Thank you, magical problem-solving virus. There's only one of and has never been attempted to be replicated again, which would definitely change the course of the entire franchise. Thank you! And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game characters who died but came back to life in the sequel anyway. Hope you enjoyed that, and why not go and give me a follow over on Blue Sky, where I'm at RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there, and I hope you're treating yourself well with love and respect, my friends, because you deserve the best. Yes, you do. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.